You need to stop saving people. We talked about this in one of our other lessons, but the reality is that patients don't want to be saved. They want to be the hero in the story. So stop trying to save them. Or, I guess I should say it differently. Stop telling them you're trying to save them. Save them and let them take the credit. When it comes to stories of saving people, you guys have all heard, or hopefully you've heard, the story of my first date with my now fiance. The funny thing is that when she found out I recorded it, I got one of those really nice kind of death stares you get when you did something wrong, she loves that she was saved by me, but she hates that she doesn't look like she knows what she's doing to everyone else. That is the same dynamic that our patients face. When they hear the story of their oral appliance or of them getting this life-saving treatment, they don't necessarily want to hear that their life was saved. They want to hear another angle. And it's different, but understand that. When you think about things that you do, you're not hoping that someone will come in and save the day. You want to be the main character in that story. So stop saving them. In order to help our patients reach this aspirational identity, we have to understand what it is that they want to achieve. This can only happen with something called active listening. Now, we've probably all heard this phrase, and if you're like me, the first time I heard this phrase was my first year in college in an English class for public speaking. And I remember sitting in class, looking at the teacher, and he says, okay, we're going to talk about active listening. And he's like, yeah, so active listening is when you listen, but actively. And I was like, well, duh. And then I thought to myself, well, I do that already. And then he asked me a simple question. He said, in the last conversation you had, what are 3 things you remember that the other person said? And I sat there at my desk and I looked at the piece of paper, because we're supposed to write these 3 things down. Like, it wasn't like a raise your hand if you remember 3 things. It was write them down and share them with your partner. And I remember sitting in class, looking at my piece of paper, thinking, of course I remember 3 things from the last conversation. But when I went to write them down, I realized the only thing I remembered was my responses. You see, most people listen with the intent to respond. When you hear someone say something, whether it be an objection or a comment or a question, our first response is we're already thinking about what we're going to say next. And that is actually stopping us from hearing what's being said to us. So I want to challenge you with this little idea. When someone says something to you, take a second before you respond and just close your mouth. And instead of thinking about what you're going to say next, think about what they said first. And then share what's on your mind. If you do this on repeat, eventually you won't have to actually remember to close your mouth. You're going to start learning to listen first and then speak second. But you're going to find that it actually changes the way that you engage in conversation. And for the record, I'm not trying to insult anyone. If you're insulted, I'm sorry. But the reality is that culture, our whole culture, not you, everyone does this. So don't be offended. This is an issue we have to work on together, and we'll lead others by example. So, when you're in a conversation, remember, before you respond, remember what was just said to you, and then share your thoughts. When you do this on a more regular basis with your patients, you'll start to hear things that you never really heard before. You're going to hear about Mrs. Jones and how tired she is when she drives her grandkids to school, or Bob and how he wishes he had more energy when he got home from work, but unless he's got that cup of coffee at 5 p.m., he just can't do it. And you're going to start to learn that there are these frustrations in our patients' lives and an aspirational identity, something that they wish they were. And they're not going to tell it to you like that, but they're going to say or complain about something: the drowsy driving, the 6 cups of coffee, the kids, being cranky. And you got to hear beyond the words that they say, which is where active listening comes in. When you learn to listen, you can then learn to engage with those people in a way that communicates concern and helps them hear that you care because you're voicing the same things that they've told you, those 3 things that you've heard in the conversation. And then you can help point them back to their aspirational identity. You can help Mrs. Jones feel awake when she drives. So, I challenge you. Take a few minutes, and when you have that next conversation, pause before you respond. When you find yourself thinking about what you're going to say, make sure you only think about what you're going to say when the other person has stopped talking. It'll change not just the way you interact with patients, but the way you interact with people outside of work as well.